Hello everyone, I'm your host Arvin Adriyan, and today we are with a well-known Swedish philosopher, Alexander Bard, and we are going through several matters, cultural and political topics about the future of Iran, which I'd like to know the knowledge and wisdom of Alexander about it. So, hello Alexander, happy to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Would you like to give us some background information, how you got interested about Iran and Iranian philosophy?
Sure. I was a philosophy student, of course, in the 1970s and 1980s. And I realized that in my generation, we can't really start philosophy with the Greeks. We have to go much deeper into history and especially into Asian history. So I started studying Eastern philosophy. And then I discovered that most Westerners who studied the East were focusing on India or China. When I traveled through Asia in the 1980s and met a lot of different people and studied the literature, I discovered that actually Asian history is three different distinct fields. It's China, India, and Iran. And I got really interested in Iranian philosophy, especially pre-Islamic Iranian philosophy. And I even learned ancient Iranian so I could speak the language, the Avesta language, so I could understand it, the way you learn Sanskrit if you want to study Indian history. And I even came to the conclusion that I would be happy to convert to Zoroastrianism, which I did in the early 1990s, the whole ceremony. And I became a Zoroastrian. So I am a Western converted Zoroastrian today, and I'm, of course, very proud to be a part of the Iranian philosophical tradition, which is incredibly rich, full of ideas, and I think today important not only for Iran, but important globally, because Iran is also at the center of the connection between East and West. And now we have to have a much more global agenda. The East and the West have to understand each other better. I think the absolute key to this understanding is Iran.
Great, interesting. Would you please tell me some positive point that you got about Zoroastrianism to be inspired to convert to it?
Well, what's important with Zoroastrianism is that it's the only phallic monist religion. So let me rephrase that. Monist means that Zoroastrians genuinely believe there's only one world and everything in this world is interconnected with everything else. So do the Buddhists of India, and so do the Taoists of China. And the reason why Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism have so much in common is because of the Silk Route. I would even say that you could call these three religions the Silk Route Triad, and only think the reason we're talking about Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism as separate religions or separate schools of thought is simply because we also make a differentiation between India, Iran, and China. But what's interesting with Zoroastrianism is also not only that it's monist, it's also the fact that it's related to Buddhism in a very interesting way. It's like Zoroastrianism and Buddhism as a couple play the same role that Yang and Yin do within Taoism in China. So whereas the Chinese traditions always try to put the phallic of Yang and the magical of Yin together into one faith and create some kind of harmony or balance between the two, the Iranians and the Indians have long understood that it's not really about balance or harmony between the phallic and the magical, but that the phallic and the magical serve different purposes. So I'm very, very happy today to get engaged with many Buddhists. For example, John Farvarki is a friend of mine. He's huge on YouTube these days. He's a Canadian Buddhist convert, and I'm a European Zoroastrian convert. And the conversation we can have today between Zoroastrians and Buddhists are incredibly rich and fruitful. The reason for this is that Buddhism is ultimately a matrical monist religion. So say you worship the goddess or the mother in a deep sense, like you worship circularity, you worship that everything returns to the same. You might even have reincarnation as part of your worldview, so that everything returns to the same point all over again. That is essentially what Buddhism deals with. And this is very Indian. But what the Iranians discovered with Zoroastrianism was that we could also construct a religion based on the phallic, which is where are we going to go? Where are we heading? So the phallic is always about a vision and then a strategy on how to get to that destination. This is, of course, for Westerners, this is, of course, the exodus out of Egypt, how the Hebrews walked out of Egypt. But that is more or less a replica of an originally Iranian idea. The Messiah, for example, or Moshiach in Judaism, is originally Zoroastrian, and it's called the Sociant, the idea of the Savior that arrives at a specific moment in time to save us. Or the Sociant could also be a group of people who lead us out of our predicaments and out of our existential angst towards some kind of a paradise or a better world. This idea I find incredibly interesting, and I think it's exactly what's needed now in the 21st century. I think we need to return to the idea of the phallic. The problem, though, is that when you look at the phallic ideas in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they're all based on Plato's dualistic idea that there are ideas out there that are perfect, and we live in a very fallible world that is imperfect. But in reality, the Zoroastrians always said, no, that's not the case. We live in the world as it is. And whatever ambitions we have to create a better world than the one we have today is part of the mission of the Sociant. So to be a Zoroastrian is to cultivate the idea of civilization, cultivate the idea that with each generation, we can learn from each other and create a constantly better world. And Zoroastrianism is still the only religion that unifies the correct world view, which is the monist worldview. So you study physics today, everything is interconnected with everything else. So physics today, modern physics has taught us that the world is truly monist. Mind and body are never separate. Mind and body always interact with each other. Everything interacts with everything else. So if you want to be truthful to science today, you have to be a monist. But the only phallic religion that has a monist worldview is Zoroastrianism.
Excellent. I still want to add something in your speech. You brought a very interesting point about Zoroastrianism and how it looks at the whole existential world. Many people, they think that Zoroastrianism was the first monotheistic religion. Monotheistic means there is only one God. But it's unfortunately misunderstanding from Zoroastrianism. In Zoroastrian worldview, it doesn't emphasize on one God. What is the benefit of having one God or thousands of God or no God? This is not what Zoroastrians teaching us, but it says the whole world is interconnected and they are connected to each other. So the whole world is one, not there is only one God. And the matter of Sociant also was interesting. We should still remember that there are concepts that have been borrowed from Zoroastrianism to other religions or other point of view, but the quality of that concept is not exactly as it was in Zoroastrianism. For example, when we come to this concept of Sociant, you can become a Sociant. Someone else can become Sociant, means beneficial for the world due to their constructive deeds, their constructive work in the human society. So in Zoroastrianism, we are not accepting that one day one Sociant come from somewhere and save us, but we are encouraged to make ourselves with having a useful pattern as a Sociant to work better in improving the world through advancement. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I call it to be sociantic. So you can be a sociantic person. You can wake up in the morning and meditate and then concentrate on what can you do well during that day. This is the best way to describe it in contemporary English, is to say you want to have a constructive mindset. And this is the principle of Asha. It's the only ethical principle you need, and it's the only ethical principle in Zoroastrianism. So at any given time, you take the best of your knowledge, the best wisdom you have, you collaborate with other people who support you and cover your weaknesses, essentially. You build your team of people, and then you take on a sociantic approach to reality. So you walk out into the world and say, what can I do to improve the world today? This is of course a beautiful mindset to just share, and don't confuse it with anything else. And this is the principle of Asha. And Asha in Zoroastrianism is both how the world works. It literally means how things work in ancient Persian. So Asha is a principle for how the world operates. So that's what science does. You walk out in the world, you try your different theses, and you say, oh, okay, this is how the world works. But Asha is also an ethical principle. So why not work in collaboration with how things work? Of course, this is inherited in Taoism in China. It's called Tao. So they have a similar approach there. So Taoism is very closely related to Zoroastrianism. It's almost like a Chinese version of Zoroastrianism. So you try to find the way on how things work, and then you try to find your own way for how you want to collaborate with the world and with other people around you to improve on the world. This is to have a sociantic mindset. And if you purify your mind, so you clean your mind through meditation and contemplation, and then just focus on how can I contribute to this world in the best way possible, then you got an excellent ethical principle. You don't need the 10 commandments of Judaism. You don't need all the rules and the books of Islam and Christianity at all, because you have one simple principle, and that's all you need. The opposite of that, then, of course, is druj. And druj is essentially to have a destructive mindset. Destructive mindset means that you harbor bitterness in your heart. It's like you have an attitude towards life like, I didn't get what I wanted out of life, and because I was unfortunate, I'm going to put revenge onto the world, and I'm going to feel envious towards other people because of the successes they have. You're only going to become your own enemy with that mindset. But unfortunately, the world is also full of druj. It's full of destructive mindsets that want nothing good for others and nothing good even for themselves. And when you get into this sort of the comfort of not wanting to improve on the world, the comfort of really liking that the world goes down with you, this sort of very sort of destructive, suicidal mindset, that's called druj. And that's the opposite of Asha. So these are the very simple ethical principles we have in Zoroastrianism. I also want to say that you're right about the one God thing. The reason why we talk about one God in Zoroastrianism, because the idea comes from Zoroastrianism, is simply because we want to share a narrative, and we want to share a vision, and want to share an idea where we're going together. So say you're within a tribe or a community of people, and you decide that we're going to get there. We're going to improve our lives and our world. We're going to improve on our life, and we're going to get to a certain point, and that's going to be the direction we're heading. This is what's needed. What's needed is one shared narrative. Today, we will even need a shared narrative for all of humanity, because we're now 8 billion people who share the same planet. And for this planet to survive, and for us to survive on this planet, we need to share this narrative. And this is where Zoroastrianism comes into the picture today, because it is a universal religion. It sets up the conditions for actually creating that kind of grand narrative. And that's the kind of work I do now as a Zoroastrian philosopher. But what's important here is that God in itself has many different aspects. There's the magical aspect of God, which Buddhism thrives on, which is, do we take care of everybody in the tribe? Do we push everybody forward? Do we support everybody so they have the means to, do we educate our children? All those desires are magical. But we also have the phallic one, which is, where are we going? Where are we heading? Where is the promised land? And how can we get there? And Zoroastrianism includes both these aspects.
Excellent. Alexander, one of the unique features of this worldview, Zoroastrian worldview, that I could recognize is, for those people who do not believe in any God, even if they are atheist, or those who, for example, believe in reincarnation and becoming to the world again and again, still Zoroastrianism doesn't make conflicts. I mean, I have friends who are atheists, but still they are 100% thinking that if we do not use this Zoroastrian's worldview in a destroyed society to make it work constructive, we won't achieve the glory for that society for the future. So they are just not believing in God at all, but still they think this worldview can push any society towards advancement and righteousness, and making the better place for living, not only for human, but for animals and plants. Don't you think the same about different people with different ideas of God can also feel comfortable with Zoroastrianism?
Well, to begin with, Zoroastrianism was the religion of the first Persian Empire, and it was the first empire ever in human history that tolerated that people could have different faiths, they could have different ethnicities. There was imperial construction, which was brilliant. It was about 600 before Christ, and that's precisely why the Persians essentially invented the idea that you can have a plurality of ideas and a plurality of religions within the same empire and collaborate through trade. So that is a Zoroastrian idea in itself. But Zoroastrianism itself doesn't have these problems that you discuss here. Atheism, to me, is essentially a Western problem, and it deals with the collapse of Christianity. That's why it starts with Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century, and he declares the death of God. But that's the Christian God he's talking about. He's even talking specifically about the Protestant Christian God and the death of Protestantism. We don't have the problem in Zoroastrianism simply because our concept of God is Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda has two different entities. Ahura is existence itself, that which exists. And Mazda is to give sense to that existence. So you could say that that's like consciousness, like we as human beings experience human consciousness. So the conscious experience of existence is Ahura Mazda. And we are personifying Ahura Mazda as human beings. Now, if we unify our forces, so we as together as a community strive to reach a certain point, or a certain vision we're heading for. The name for that vision is God. God is basically the name of where we're going to go. Originally in the tribe was the Ur-fathers. It was like the fathers of the fathers who led us. So the men who led us at the front and the women who backed us up at the back. You would have an idea of an Ur-father before them and an Ur-mother behind them. This is what Zoroastrians have inherited. We don't have the problem with atheism because, number one, the universe itself, everything that exists is Ahura. Even what potentially can exist can be included in Ahura according to Zoroastrianism. And Mazda is simply how we deal with that. So that's the sense we have of experiencing the world and interacting with the world and collaborating with the world to be fully human. And Ahura Mazda is simply this idea that just like we can all be dissociant, we can all work on the improvement of the world, we can all be part of personifying Ahura Mazda. But I'd be very careful to say that you are Ahura Mazda, I am Ahura Mazda, because that's again a very Western idea of individualism. And in Zoroastrianism, it is the community that's important. What the Muslims later inherited and called the Ummah, what the Christians later inherited and called the church, what the Jews later inherited and called the synagogue or the congregation. All these ideas of the congregation as being sacred come from Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, this is called the Daina. The Daina is the community that's sacred, and the Daina can personify Ahura Mazda. We can, when the whole community is working within Asha, and Asha is flowing through us within the community, we start to personify Ahura Mazda. So we don't have the problem with atheism. Atheism to Zoroastrian be like saying, that's like pretending the universe does not exist. And that's like pretending human beings with a consciousness do not exist. Obviously, there are human beings that are conscious, and certainly subconscious too. And there is a universe within which we exist. That's undeniable. And that's why we don't have the atheism problem. We also don't really have the problem with reincarnation. And I would like to emphasize that the reincarnation comes from too much of a focus on the magical, too much of a focus on that everybody should follow, everybody should come with us. And it's only when you're lacking a vision, a direction, so you don't have a goal in your own life, you start to think of reincarnation. It's only when your life becomes so meaningless because you have no vision, there's no direction, you don't know where to go, where to put meaning into your life. You don't have a future ahead of you. That's when the ideas of reincarnation start to pop up. Like, well, because I cannot live my life fully, I have to live my life again. But you will never consciously come back in a new life form because your consciousness is tied to your body. This is fundamental to Zoroastrianism. We firmly believe in an embodied mind. This exactly what I say, Ahura Mazda. Mazda is tied to Ahura. There can be no sense, there can be no consciousness without it being tied to physical existence. So the same goes for human beings. You are not a mind without a body. That's a very Platonist idea. That's a Gnostic idea. And Zoroastrianism is very much against Gnosticism. So, no, we are unified. We're embodied minds, meaning that your mind is totally unified with your body, and actually your mind will need the body to operate. And because your body is unique, also your mind is unique. So I don't have a problem, having people that believe in some kind of reincarnation around me, but it's probably a very sophisticated form of reincarnation, not necessarily one where you die one day and you wake up as a baby the next day in a new body and remember everything that happened to your previous life. I've never met a baby who'd lived for 98 years before they were born, and until that happens, some kind of hardcore reincarnation is obviously not on the cards. And thank God it isn't, because the ambition of Zoroastrians is not to live forever, and Zoroastrians is not to live again and again. That would be horrible. The ambition of Zoroastrians is to live ameritat, is to reach wholeness, to have lived the full life, to have been a full human being, to have been born, to have been a child, to have been a grown-up, and to one day be a wise older man or a woman who can contribute and lead to the whole tribe. This idea of being lucky enough to live a whole life is the beautiful idea of ameritat, which is central to Zoroastrianism.
Interesting, the words that you shared with us. And I wanted to still add 2 points in it to know your view about it. First of all, when you mentioned about different religions, I want to ask you, Alexander, what would you say to those Iranians who, of course, have seen some 1,400 years of distraction happening in Iran because of Islam, the religion which was not belonging to Iran, but coming by force and swords. So many Iranians nowadays, and of course, most of them are very strange to Zoroastrianism and its teaching. So many of them, they say that, Islam destroyed our country, so Zoroastrianism is also another religion, so that will also destroy the country, which we know it's not really logical conclusion about two different religions. But what do you say to?
Okay, I will go universal here, and then I will speak about the Iranian cause. So, in the 7th century before Christ, Babylon is conquered by the Persians. And the Persians introduce a religion called Zoroastrianism. And even the Persian emperor himself kisses the feet of Marduk, the Babylonian god, out of respect for the Babylonian people. And thereby he reconciles the Babylonians with the Persians and create a Persian empire where the Babylonians are included. And Babylon, even for all practicality, becomes the capital eventually of this empire. Now, if we look at history today, and we want to go back to where civilization really started with the axial age, I would say the axial age in practice, not in theory, but the axial age in practice starts on that very day when the Persian emperor kisses the feet of the Babylonian god. So for us today, when we're going to try to create a shared grand narrative for the entire world, we need to go back to Iran. And we need to go back to the first Persian Achaemenid Empire and how it started. That's exactly when you walk into the United Nations building in New York, you see exactly that very thing. You see the what do you call it in English? The club. You see this tombola, which has that message written onto it. So universality starts within Zoroastrianism, and it's an Iranian idea. Now, when we then look at Iran today and say in the new Iranian nationalism or an Iranian renaissance, I would strictly emphasize that Iran needs to go back to that point in time when Iran contributed the most to itself and to the rest of the world. This was Iran at its most Asha. This was Iran when Iran personified as a nation and as a cultural identity, personified the Saoshyant. And we need the Saoshyant again today. And when we're going to unify East and West and digital in the age we live in today, I think the unification of East and West to begin with has to be through Iranian Renaissance. So there has to be the Iranian Renaissance, because it's through Iranian culture we can understand the East and West and go into dialogue and then thoroughly discuss such things as, okay, there's a difference here between monism and dualism to begin with. And to understand the world better, we have to accept achievements of contemporary science. We can no longer run around with all kinds of new age weird ideas and try to plaster them onto the world when in reality they're not true. And this principle of Asha, I think, can be used as a universal principle for all. And to me, this means I converted Zoroastrianism. I am a philosopher in the Zoroastrian tradition today. I strongly believe in an Iranian Renaissance in the sense that Iran goes back to its own roots and realizes its own contributions to humanity, not only for itself, but for humanity as a whole, and sees the richness in this culture. And this is, to me, the fundament of the Iranian Renaissance.
Just in this point, I want to ask you, so what do you think if Iranians want to implement democracy for the future political structure of Iran, not some Iranian through Iranian origin political structure? So don't you think they go wrong if they look for democracy instead of some prescription which is based on true Iranian values?
Well, I don't think there are Iranian values. I think the universal values, and I think universal values start with Iran. Iranians were the ones who invented universal values. We should definitely defend universal values because it's an Iranian innovation. Iran stands for universality. That's what makes it unique among nations. So for me, the what's important here, how should I phrase this? Democracy in itself cannot be a goal. Democracy is a pragmatic solution to problem solving in a society where you have the printing press, but you don't have the internet yet. So it was developed in the West as a way of fighting out different interests in a society, so that academia and commercial enterprise and politics could somehow collaborate without fighting each other. This was democracy. You had a plural society. Now, what was the benefit of democracy? Plurality. So the great thing is that if you're going to be innovative, you need plurality. That's exactly what Zoroastrianism preaches, plurality, because it is a religion of ever-refreshing change. So if you're going to ever-refreshing change, you need innovation. You need those who are the hungriest and who want to innovate the most. You need them at the forefront instead of the fat, lazy bastards who were successful of the past. So this constant renewal that is fundamentally Zoroastrian, Harvatat, the principle of Harvatat, is central to me. And I think here is where the Iranian tradition comes into the picture. So you need plurality. So you need different centers, different nodes in a society, different centers in a society that are in some kind of competition with one another. There's another beautiful Iranian innovation is the bazaar. So you go to the bazaar, and because the different traders are competing one another on who has the best product and the best price or whatever, you create a market. And because there is a market and there's competition in the market, you get the best results out of that. We know it, if you walk through the Soviet Union, they didn't have bazaars. They only had one state shop, and they produced one product that was there for 20 years, and there was no improvement and no innovation. This is plurality, not democracy. So plurality is what's valuable. Now, if you can create a system of plurality that is much more modern than democracy, then I'm not going to sit here and defend democracy. Then I'm certainly going to look to that. And I think Iran, because Iran invented so many other ideas like federalism, for example, then certainly Iran could be the right place today to invent a new kind of a social system that takes in and celebrates plurality, but emphasizes plurality even more than democracy does. Because democracy eventually becomes corrupt. Democracy also eventually has a privileged elite that are ignorant of the masses. And this is exactly why democracy is not the ultimate form of rule.
Even though democracy comes from the ancient Athens, the idea of democracy, but if we look at what those Greek philosophers in Athens, they are talking about democracy. For example, Plato, when he categorizes different political system, the five different ones. He started from aristocracy, then going to democracy, when the warriors are ruling the society. Then it goes to oligarchy, if my pronunciation is correct, when
Yes.
some wealthy people, mainly corrupted, are ruling the society. And he still comes from best, which is aristocracy, to down. So it was aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy, and then he comes to the democracy. So he puts democracy at the fourth step, which he believes out of democracy, tyranny will burn.
Well,
And
there is another word that he doesn't use because he doesn't get it, and it's hierocracy, rule through the hero. I believe in that. That's why I'm studying both Marx and Nietzsche. I firmly believe that we have not even been close to Marxism in practice, because Marx would never have improved Lenin's idea of the Leninist revolution in Russia. There was no way that a small little elite of students could, take all the peasants of Russia with them into the communist paradise. That ultimately failed miserably. But I do respect Marx, because Marx takes Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch and says that why just one Übermensch? Why not a whole tribe of Übermensch who can rule the world together? But that's somewhere in the future to happen. And so it's a very similar idea. This is the part of Mastak that I actually am interested in too. But you cannot do that prematurely. The problem with the Mastakite society in ancient Persia was the same problem as you have with Stalinism in the Soviet Union or Maoism in China. It became very bloody and messy because the time wasn't right for something like that to happen. But hierocracy is, any society should first of all try to find a heroic. How can we get better? How can we improve in ourselves? And where in our society do we have that force that enables us to improve in ourselves? That means you have to be very vigilant against corruption. You have to be very vigilant against people going fat and lazy. You have to be on your feet and be competitive to reach that. But if you construct a society that rewards the people who work the hardest and who are most innovative, then everybody benefits from that kind of society. This would be a more Nietzschean and also Marxist idea of society, and it certainly is very Zoroastrian. And Plato never discusses that. He never discusses, interesting enough, he only talks about which group of people are going to rule the society, instead of thinking which ideas in the society should we promote. So the problem with democracy is that what we call democracy today isn't democracy at all. The true democracy is the lynch mob. It's just the majority running out and killing whoever is the minority in any society. That is ruled by the people, if we're honest about it. Then we say, well, we have rule of law. Well, that's not really democracy. Already there, you have something else. So what you do is that you install a system of some kind, a civilization with incentives, where the incentives point in a certain direction. Now, if these incentives are only meant to obstruct against innovation and keep a certain privileged elite in power, then I'm certainly against it. But if you have a system of rules that encourages constant innovation, which is a very Zoroastrian idea, then the name for that in Greek is hierocracy, the rule of the heroic, so the rule of the hero. And that is what I would propose. As it's a way going forward into philosophical, ideological work, and see if we, maybe through the Iranian Renaissance, maybe Iran is the place eventually, we can establish some kind of rules-based hierocracy that promotes innovation in a society. Because then we would really accomplish Zoroaster's vision of a society of Harvatat.
Excellent. What I got as a conclusion, for achieving that hierocratic, if I pronounce it correctly, for achieving those heroes, again, we need some useful worldview to teach us the society to become those kinds of, immortal and useful figures in the society. So
exactly, we must have a phallic vision. So this is what Zoroastrianism provides. And what Zoroastrianism says is that if we reach for something higher and better than we currently have, we give that a name, and then we use that as a direction. And then we start constructing a narrative on how we're going to get there, a story about how we're going to get there. That is what Zoroastrianism does. And that's what we do today. You and I, in our work, we're looking to formulate the Sociant, the possibility of the Sociant.
Thank you. I think those Iranians who are listening to these valuable words and knowledge from you, they already got why it's so important to spread Zoroastrianism in the society. And
Yes.
now I'm going to ask you one more question. And that's about kind of, if I am right, a kind of famous sentence that you had, at least for me, it always remains in my mind, that you said, everything is religion. So would you open this more for us?
I think a terrible mistake that was made in the West was the separation of the church and the state. It's not terrible to separate, say, the military from the police. It's not terrible at all because you have the police force takes care of the internal affairs within a community. The military defends the community to the outside world. Keep them apart. It's a good idea. We also know, if we're men, we know that we should keep the chieftain and the priest separate. So the expert of the mind and the expert of the body should be kept separately if you go to war or if you go hunting. So then many times that actually it's good to split things up and not have them in the same place. Because if you unify these things, you often get some kind of tyranny and some kind of stupidity because of it. So to keep the world open in that sense can be very beneficial. But I think the unifying story of any given society is what religion is. Religion literally means in Latin, religare means what connects people, what unifies people. It's nothing to do with God. You don't have to be theist or an atheist or anything like that, or pantheist, to be religious. To be religious just means that you understand that you're a human being and you're a social creature. You're a social being. You're a member of a community. And you're dying to serve that community in the best way possible. That is what it means to be religious. And in this sense, the separation of church and state in the West was tragic. I think when the Europeans went across the world in the last 400 years and plundered the world for resources in an irresponsible way to colonialism and exploitation, instead of employing the world, instead of going to different places and creating cultures that were sustainable, which you would do if you're an Persian emperor, for example. You would not conquer a country to plunder it. You would actually conquer a country to include it within your empire, then set it free to do its own thing. The relationship between the Persian Empire and the Jewish nation, for example, is beautiful because the Persians encouraged the Jews to be a nation within the Persian Empire, which is a brilliant idea that I'm going to explore in my next book. So this idea of a plurality of different sources of power that are unified through a shared narrative. So there's a narrative that says, let's celebrate both the chieftain and the priest. And it's a shared story. So the West, to heal, the West needs to unify church and state in a new way and understand that everything is religion. We never operate outside of religion. All our beliefs, everything we do, every day we wake up in the morning, everything that determines what we do that day, everything that motivates us as human beings, what makes us love our children, all of that is part of religion.
Excellent. Now, what you said also emphasize how wrong are when people mistakenly says that we should separate religion from politics. There is no implementation, there is nothing that we can implement such thing. Everyone has some worldview, even if you are religiously. You have your religiousess religion, isn't so? If you start preaching for it, you are making a religion. But they should correct it instead of we should divide religion from politics. If they are believing in such things, they should say that they should try that religion doesn't interfere on decision making of the government. So that can be done through different methods, which in many countries now we can see, but we cannot separate religion from personal.
I agree, and this is where the West went wrong, because the West about 500 years ago differentiated between theology and philosophy, and that is a ridiculous idea when you're in Asia. Iranians have never separated theology and philosophy. Indians never separated theology and philosophy. The Japanese and Chinese certainly never separated the two. No, you have a worldview, And that worldview means that you have certain religious beliefs, and they will determine your direction, where you're heading. And then you have certain political beliefs, and the political beliefs are basically how you do the day-to-day activities. What are your priorities today? What is your current budget? What do you spend your money on, etc.? That is political decision to me. So political is like here and now, whereas religion is, it's the direction where we're going. There should never have been a division between theology and philosophy, and only a culture that thought it was a good idea to separate church and state would come up with that. Then we'd have theology for the church, and then we have philosophy for the state. When in reality, philosophy and theology are intertwined with one another. And in Zoroastrianism, this is called Mazda Yasna, which is the original term for philosophy. The philosophy in Greek, philosophia, was only inherited from the Persian. Mazda Yasna means the love of wisdom. So let's unify religion and politics into one and call it for what it is. Everything is religion. And this religious container is the one out of which we can create a political ideology, for example, a hierarchy of a plurality of minds that is thriving and is innovative and creates a great civilization. This is, to me, the way to go forward. And this is why I deny the Western division of theology and philosophy. The second, one of our books called Syntheism, Creating God in the Internet Age. We write about God and religion all the time in our philosophical work. We refuse to make that separation, just like we're also saying you cannot have a society where church and state are separate. You have to understand that they are combined into the same society, and they're all underneath a religious narrative.
Excellent. I really appreciate your time, Alexander. It was many of points that you brought. It was really mind-provoking. And I would say big thanks to you, especially from those Iranians who are supposed to listen to your words and think and rethink about the importance of implementing Zoroastrianism in the society for building the country for a better future. And
Yes.
we should have these discussions in the future. So thank you. And would you
Thank
like
you
to
so much,
say?
Arvin. I enjoyed having the conversation with you. I would love to continue the conversation. So let's stay in contact. Let's do our separate research. Let's also do our research together, and let's become activists. Become activists for an Iranian Renaissance, and certainly for a Zoroastrian Renaissance. I'm totally in favor of that.
Thank you.